Doubt is a powerful tool. It's a state of mind that allows us to thoughtfully analyze an idea, statement, or belief through a more critical but arguably pessimistic sort of lens. When something sounds, or more often than not feels off, we notice it and use this sensation to inform our next actions in response. It's the kind of sensation that keeps you from getting tricked, from getting manipulated, or even killed. Doubt is also a weakness. It keeps us from pursuing valuable or risky ventures for the sake of self-preservation, even if pursuing those risky paths might have resulted in huge benefits or revelations. It's a feeling that holds you back, that lets others push the envelope and expand their horizons while you linger in the space that you've already occupied. It is because of these two conflicting understandings and resulting actions of doubt that we as a species have to form a sort of personal sliding scale for our trust in something, a threshold of concern to be reached before we remove ourselves from a situation. This can manifest in a number of ways. It could be the number of red flags you're willing to stomach before throwing in the towel on a relationship, the number of setbacks you're willing to endure before dropping out of a project, the number of ideological concerns or faults you're willing to ignore before discounting a system of belief. There's not a set rule on when or why you should leave something behind, and different people have different thresholds. Because of this, the most predatory institutions, groups, and individuals will often find ways to prey on the least assuming people with the highest thresholds, to take their time, money, attention, or even their life. So, how do you know when you've gone too far? How do you know when you've been too trusting? This is the question that Creep 2 attempts to answer.
The movies we're discussing tonight show just how dangerous it can be to put your trust in someone that you don't fully know. It can be hard to trust someone's intentions in real life, but even harder to trust it when they're hidden behind a screen. Did you know that there are strangers on the internet who do whatever they want with your personal information? There are real people on the internet who do whatever they want, stealing your personal information and making it publicly available for anyone to see. I used one of the many available people search sites to look up information about myself and was shocked by how much was out there. Legally, these sites have to remove your information if you ask, but they make it extremely difficult to do. Well, not anymore thanks to the sponsor of tonight's video, Aura. Look, you know the deal. I've worked with Aura before, and in a time when scammers are desperate for your personal information, you won't find a better defense. Aura can help you remove your personal information off of data brokers and people search sites that sell your information to identity thieves, scammers, and more. Aura monitors your personal information, including social security number, across billions of data points, like the dark web and public court records, to alert you about potential identity theft. Every adult on the account, up to 5, gets $1 million in identity theft insurance to help cover eligible losses and fees, with a total of up to $5 million in coverage. Do you know how much that is? Those aren't the only reasons to download Aura. You also get access to a VPN, antivirus, and password manager, all with 24/7 available support. With all those features, it's crazy you can get it all together in one affordable app. Allowing yourself to be defenseless on the internet is like literally putting your information into the hands of strangers. Protect yourself by going to my link to try 2 weeks for free. That's right, free. That'll be enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data has been exposed. Thanks again to Aura for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get back to the movie.
Creep 2, though it focuses on the same antagonist from our first movie, manages to tell a very different story from its predecessor. Where the first movie put a focus on social pressures and manipulation, the desire not to rock the boat and the consequences of that desire, Creep 2 has a lot more to do with trust and a willingness, or unwillingness, to believe in the violent capabilities of a person you don't know well. What does this mean? Well, tonight's analysis should do a good job of answering that question in detail, but to put it simply, Aaron, the actual character from the first film, didn't know that Joseph was a killer, whereas Sara, the protagonist from Creep 2, doesn't believe it. The way information is presented to the two characters is totally different, and further than that, the protagonists themselves are distinctly different people who respond to their environment in unique ways. So, before we get into the actual plot, let's first take a look at both of them. If you're watching this video, then you've probably already watched my first video on Creep, and thus have become familiar with the character of Aaron. If you haven't though, I'll briefly go over his character again. Aaron is/was, all things considered, a good person with poor self-preservation skills. He was realistically motivated by money to endure a number of strange and increasingly uncomfortable social situations, and put himself in danger by efforting to see the best in the person who he was there to film for, the antagonist for both these films, who we'll discuss later. He was clearly uncomfortable with the situation for the majority of the time that he was in it, but stuck it out for a number of reasons, the primary of which being his empathy and desire to be polite. This resulted in his death, a death that was, as many fans of the series might point out, likely preventable. The protagonist of the sequel, a woman named Sara shares a few qualities with Aaron, the first of which being a career in video production, but further, she's also motivated, independent, and capable of recognizing when someone is acting off. The differences in her character, however, are what make her so interesting. For one thing, she actively seeks out the strange and off-putting when it comes to her social interactions, a result of her desire for a groundbreaking career in amateur documentary. She's also a lot more prepared and action-oriented. From early on into the film, she acknowledges the danger of the situation she has put herself in and does her best to prepare for what might be coming, even going so far as to hide a weapon on her person. Obviously, she does manage to overlook some huge red flags, but she does this intentionally, whereas Aaron had to be manipulated past them. Sara has a much more dominant personality than Aaron, who in his film is sort of just along for the ride, whereas Sara has a more definitive goal with her work, that she actively pursues by making choices and claims that even surprise our antagonist at times. A question that I keep coming back to is Sara smarter than Aaron? And my immediate impulse is to say yes, just due to how she, at least for a period, takes control over the situation in her film. However, it's possible that what she actually is more ambitious. And while that guides her to a different ending than Aaron, it doesn't necessarily mean she's smarter. More capable? Possibly. More informed? Absolutely. But more intelligent? Well, it's hard to say. We'll keep this question in mind as we start going through our summary, but there's still one more person we need to talk about before we start: the creep. He calls himself Joseph in the first film, and we'll come to know him as Aaron in the second, a name he stole from one of his victims. There's a lot we don't know about him, but here's what we do. 1, he's a liar. 2, he's a manipulator. And 3, he's a killer. And in all honesty, that's it. We can make assumptions about certain things, and it's possible that some of the things that the character says about himself are actually true, but by now we should understand that taking anything he says about himself at face value is a dangerous, possibly fatal mistake. Here are some things that we can guess are true about him. 1, that there is a symbolic nature to his killings, some spiritual or artistic connection he has found to it that makes it more than just violence in his eyes. 2, that he wants to be known. Maybe not now, maybe not by a lot of people, but at some point and someone, even if that someone is himself. What other reason is there for his collection of tapes? 3, he enjoys a game of cat and mouse, stalking, confusing, intimidating, de-escalating. He wants to play with his victims, see how far he can go. 4, and this is probably the most important one to keep in mind, he really values control and will do anything he can to keep it. When he doesn't have it, he becomes emotional like a child, and it is at those moments when he is potentially the most dangerous. I'll be referring to this character as Joseph for the duration of this video, which I know might be a little confusing due to the fact that it's not what he calls himself in the film, but I'll be talking about Aaron in this video, and if I have to keep clarifying which Aaron I mean, it'll just become convoluted. When he was with Aaron, Joseph lied about the majority of his nature. His cancer diagnosis, family, history, all of it were an illusion for his victim's sake, a way to get him to let down his guard and put up with more. In the end, after learning the kind of man his victim was, he managed to lure him to a remote lakeside scene and kill him. We see at the beginning of Creep 2 that his methods still work, but that something has changed. The film opens in the residence of a character named Dave, played by Karan Soni, who has just received a package with a stuffed baby wolf in it, a reference to the ideology presented in the first film. We see everything from the perspective of a camera hidden within this stuffed animal, a camera that Dave fails to notice. Dave, for the very brief time we spend with him, seems to share a couple qualities with Aaron, the most significant of which being a true lack of critical awareness in his situation. We learn through dialogue that Dave has been receiving calls and DVDs from an unknown stalker, and that this new package is a continuation of this pattern. Dave watches the DVD alongside the stuffed wolf and is shocked to find that it shows a recently taken video of him in his home, taken just the other night. Just after watching this film, there's a knock at Dave's door, and he lets in a friend of his, a friend who is very familiar to us. He explains the situation to Joseph, who seems incredibly concerned, asking if Dave has gone to the authorities, if he has a gun, etc. These are questions that make sense coming from a concerned friend, but also hide a more sinister motivation. Joseph is probing to see how safe he is in this situation. He feigns disappointment when Dave reveals that the police were unhelpful in the past and that he doesn't own a gun, but we know that Dave has just revealed that he's not being monitored and doesn't have a powerful form of self-defense. The whole time, Joseph is acting shocked, upset, an intensity that almost seems to motivate Dave to downplay his situation. Dave brushes off the strange encounter, failing to recognize the odd coincidence of Joseph's unannounced appearance just after the package's delivery, and goes to grab the two of them some beers, at which point Joseph shoots a knowing look to the camera and the audience before adjusting the camera so it captures captures the following scene. Joseph's performance of close friendship is just like it was back when we first saw it, acting like the two of them, who have only known each other for a few months, are incredibly close, showering Dave in praise for very basic politeness, even going so far as to tell Dave he loves him, a sentiment that is not returned, though appears to be well received. It's just like when Joseph and Aaron had their whiskeys together, Joseph putting emphasis on the strength of their relationship and bond that simply was not there. But very quickly, Joseph shifts the conversation, and in a way that is new to the audience. He begins cluing Dave into what's actually been going on, implying how strange it is that Dave never noticed how the stalking situation had only began once they were friends, how crazy the coincidence of their meeting was, how strongly he felt about Dave, and how that feeling has changed. He's worried about their friendship, but the language he uses, saying they could have been soulmates and that things started out so hot and heavy, it almost feels like there's more of a romantic element to Joseph's perception of their relationship, and Dave clearly starts piecing together the situation, his discomfort showing. Joseph says it's better if things end now, and fully drops the act around Dave. He points to the wolf, reveals that there's a camera inside it, and even announces his intention to make an 80-minute film for Dave, the significance of which is lost on Dave. But clearly, something is different for Joseph. He's tired. He doesn't have the same zest for the game that we've seen within him. He's lost his inspiration, his joy, and as Dave stands to escape, Joseph kills him with a single practice cut to the throat, a kill that doesn't seem to mean anything to him at all. As he sits there, Dave bleeding out in the chair next to him, he takes a sip of his beer and asks tiredly, "What's happening to me?" And the title appears. What I love about this intro, and what truly works, is that on a small scale, it shows what kind of a sequel this movie could have been. Just another rehashing of the first film's events. Joseph finds someone, tries to get them to trust him, stalks and manipulates them, then kills them in a grand conclusion. But that would have been boring to us, having already seen it. It's also boring to Joseph, who's clearly done it a number of times by now. These films are partially about filmmaking itself, and Joseph would be disappointed by a film that simply replicates what we've already seen, what he's already done. He's tired. He's experiencing burnout. I know that's crazy to say for a serial killer, but remember that Joseph sees his work as art, as a product of passion. It's strangely familiar watching this character lose his excitement for something that used to mean so much to him, because while we can't relate to what he's doing, hopefully, we can relate to how he's feeling. So where does Joseph go from here? We leave Joseph as the film starts up again and are introduced to our protagonist, Sara. She's working on an internet show called Encounters, where she responds to strange online personal ads and documents her experiences with their posters. Our introduction to her is done primarily through a series of clips, showing off these strange encounters and her willingness to roll with them. She's not afraid of engaging with someone on their terms, and though clearly the show is meant to present these engagements in a truthful, odd way, she never seems to make fun of or disrespect the subjects of her work. The trailer we're watching ends, and the camera reveals that the series has barely gotten any attention, which I actually have a hard time believing. In my experience, there's a huge community of people on the internet who would eat that shit up, but maybe Sara just hasn't managed to establish herself yet. Whatever the case, Sara is pretty disheartened about her lack of success, a parallel of artistic frustration to Joseph's previous burnout. Sara tells the camera how she has an empathy for the lonely and the strange and taboo, and always felt like she could detect and showcase it well, but indicates that she's very close to ditching the whole idea. In fact, the only reason she's filming is for the final episode of the season, which she says like she actually means series. She believes she's documenting her own failure with this final episode. I really love how, in both relatable and heavily exaggerated ways, this film showcases the artist's struggle, the hardship and frustration that comes with pursuing something you love doing. Joseph has been successful by his own standards, but has lost the passion, possibly due to his success. On the other hand, it seems that Sara still really cares about what she's doing, but is being disheartened by her lack of success, something that destroys tons of potential creators when they're just starting out. When these two struggling artists inevitably come together, the interactions between what they want and what they have create a truly fascinating dynamic that wasn't there in the first film. Aaron was motivated primarily by money. Sara is motivated by her desire to create something incredible. In a way, she's sort of the perfect person to engage with Joseph's insanity, or would be, if that didn't include the high likelihood of her getting murdered. As you might predict, Joseph will be the focus of this final episode of Encounters, though Sara doesn't know it quite yet. She simply responds to a vague ad that reads, "Looking for a videographer. $1,000 for the day. Honesty and emotional bravery a must. Fans of Interview with the Vampire a plus. Let's go deep together." Now obviously that $1,000 bait is something we've already discussed and are familiar with, but the other elements of this post are interesting. First of all, Interview with the Vampire reference, very cool. He's probably talking about the book, or possibly the movie with Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, but all I care about is when season 3 of the show is coming out. Anyway. The line about honesty and emotional bravery is very interesting. I don't think Aaron had a similar line in the ad he responded to, which definitely indicates that there is something different about this encounter than what we've seen before, that maybe Joseph wants something different out of it. Keep that in mind. The next day, as Sara arrives to the remote cabin where she'll be interacting with Joseph, red flag, she indicates that this is not a situation she'd normally let herself be a part of, but adds that maybe that's why the show has been sucking. All at once, we're given both a strong motivation for why Sara would endure the strangeness she's about to, and a deeper indication that she has at least some awareness of the potential danger of this meeting. She knowingly discounts it instead of failing to acknowledge it at all, which again can be tied to the interesting question of whether or not this character is smarter or simply more ambitious than Aaron. Sara knocks on the door, and it's just open. It's almost like Joseph is symbolically presenting her with the choice to step into his game of her own accord. He doesn't accost her with a greeting jump scare, doesn't stalk her and take photos. In fact, he seems vaguely disinterested in her being there at all. This might be a part of the game, almost like negging, putting the responsibility on her to prove herself to him, but later dialogue might also imply that Joseph is genuinely giving her a chance to nope out of the situation before it gets too crazy. It's always hard to tell with him. Their actual meeting is pretty funny. Joseph, now bearded and with longer hair, a visual indication of his aging, both physically and emotionally, is making a health smoothie and can't hear anything Sara says at first, but doesn't stop the blender to greet her. Eventually, once he does, he offers her a smoothie, which she accepts. I could be reading into this, but I feel like this is one of Joseph's first tests, seeing whether she'll accept a drink from a stranger without question. She does. He even jokes about it being poisoned. Joseph introduces himself as Aaron, the first time we actually hear it in the film, and when Sara introduces herself, Joseph seems taken aback that she's actually using her real name, drawing attention to A, his own dishonesty, and B, Sara's directness. He seems pleased in that classic Joseph way. Also in classic Joseph fashion, he asks to start with a hug, which, again, Sara accepts. During their meeting, Joseph asks Sara what she does for a living, and she lies for the first time, saying she shoots wedding videos for a living, clearly trying to hide the fact that Joseph is the subject of her video series. Joseph looks at her like he knows she's lying, but doesn't call it out. Perhaps he respects that she has a bit of a manipulative streak herself. He indicated earlier that he felt a connection with Sara, and though he probably says that to all the other victims, he might actually believe that a little. When Sara asks what Joseph does, the shock comes. He tells her the truth. He tells her he's a serial killer, that he's killed 39 people, and that he sees it as the greatest job in the world. The way he delivers these lines is like he's talking about something totally normal, like being an engineer or a painter, and he uses the same type of words anyone else would to describe a career they mostly enjoyed. As Joseph admits all of this, Sara is silent. We don't know what she's thinking. Joseph goes on to admit that he's turning 40 and beginning to see the effects of aging we mentioned earlier, and it sent him into a bit of a midlife spiral. He doesn't trust himself or his instincts anymore. Keep that line in mind. He describes how he used to find victims, kill them, and have massive revelations and spiritual encounters while mutilating their corpses, but that the passion for this has left him, and now it's just kind of a job, and he's sad. However, he's found the motivation to at least keep trying, based off of an interview he read with American director Francis Ford Coppola. He says what we discussed earlier, about how foolish it would be to try to make the same film he's made before, to do the same thing he's been doing for so long, and that he wants to embrace where he's at now through documentary. Again, he's describing something insane, but in a relatable way, and credit to the actor Mark Duplass, but there's something so genuine and real about the way he delivers this, that you almost feel bad for him, for losing that thing that meant so much to him. You feel empathy for the aging artist who doesn't know if he still has it in him, and all the while, he's talking about gutting a person. I covered this idea of how films can make you relate to a killer by presenting things from their perspective in an older video, and Creep 2 is a movie that does this exceptionally well. But how will Sara respond? Being a character within this, not encountering it as fiction, but reality. Before we get this response though, Joseph says something else. He says that Sara can leave. In fact, she can leave with the money, no hard feelings. He understands he's throwing a lot at her. We already know Joseph uses money as a part of manipulation tactics, but again, this claim reads more genuinely than it has before, and I think I know why. Because he knows that's not what is going to work on Sara. He clearly already knows who she is, even if he hasn't said it, and so he knows what motivates her isn't money. Hell, she even told us that herself. What will work though, is the promise of a deep, personal access to him as a person, as a subject. He'll be giving her the opportunity to produce the thing she's always wanted to produce, something real, something taboo, something that will get her the attention and acclaim she so clearly desires. He also promises not to kill her. So what does Sara say? What would you say? Seriously, what would you say? Put yourself in Sara's shoes. You've been looking for something like this for so long, something genuinely interesting and thought-provoking and real, and it just falls into your lap. gap. No immediate strings attached, the promise of safety, shaky as that may be, and the added bonus of $1,000. Now, to be totally honest, just like last time, there's probably a significant portion of people who would have bounced as soon as Joseph claimed to be a serial killer, but I also know that some of you, and maybe myself, would hear him out because of two things. One, we want to see where this goes, and two, we don't believe him. I mean, seriously, I know that it's crazy, but think about it. Would you really believe someone if they came right out and told you they were a serial killer? What kind of a serial killer would do that? Just give themselves away? I could tell you right now that I had killed someone, maybe give you all kinds of details and dates, maybe even look up an actual unsolved murder case to cite, and you almost certainly would think that it was a bit, because that's not how serial killers are supposed to act, are supposed to think. Mark Duplass has such a genuine and friendly tone of voice and way of speaking that it's hard to imagine him as a killer, even having seen it in the last film. Sure, he's strange and idiosyncratic, and I guess from this perspective, a definite liar, but a killer? It just doesn't seem real. So, Sara agrees to stay, and she does so emphatically, almost to the degree that it seems to surprise Joseph. He shows her the famous ending from the last movie, the tape of him burying an axe in Aaron's head, both as a form of proof and also an illustration of his creative perspective, reprising his unsettling Peach Fuzz song as the two of them watch. Sara responds simply with shit as the axe falls, and Joseph turns the camera on her, asking what she thought, asking if it scared her, something he clearly wants out of the relationship, which she acknowledges openly. He runs away briefly in that funny childish way, and Sara gets a moment to react honestly to herself, indicating she's more uncomfortable than she was projecting, especially after spotting the very same axe from the video hanging over the window, but has barely any time to process what has happened before Joseph comes back down in nothing but a towel. Oh. So we're doing this again. Dominating the experience through extreme intimacy, just like in the bathtub, only this time, Joseph doesn't quite get the same response. He gives this whole weird spiel about men snapping towels at each other's genitals in locker rooms and how open nudity between men or between women is a bonding ritual that men and women rarely share together, for obvious unmentioned reasons. He implies, strangely, that when men and women are together, there's always a barrier of them wondering what the other looks like naked, which might just be a you thing, my man. But he admits that he felt that towards Sara. He fully undresses in front of Sara, dick out to the whole world, and though he seems slightly uncomfortable, we know what he's doing by now. He's pushing the envelope, seeing how far Sara is willing to go, what she's willing to put up with, but this time, Sara ups the ante, offering to undress for him as well, an escalation I don't believe Joseph even intended to bring up. Framed primarily around her face, she stares Joseph down, naked. She's not uncomfortable, at least not visually, and again, it seems like Joseph is the more uncomfortable one. He keeps trying to dominate the situation only for it to be turned back onto him. If he's getting in her head, she's not showing it, and that might actually be getting into his head. We get a more honest look into Sara's actual thoughts on the situation as she excuses herself to go to the bathroom and quickly expresses her thoughts to the camera. She's measuring her doubt, like we talked about in the intro to this video. She recognizes that every red flag of hers has been raised, that she had a naked man in front of her not even 10 minutes into their meeting, that he's claiming to be a killer, but that's everything she wants in a subject. She also says what we've been thinking. She doesn't believe he's a killer. Even after the video, she doesn't believe it, which I guess is fair because we've all seen the video too, and regardless of how real it looked, it could have been faked. Hell, Patrick Bryce, the actor who portrayed Aaron in Creep, is still walking around today, so she decides to stay and keep up with the documentary. Despite this, she still recognizes that he could be dangerous, even if he's not a killer, so she hides a knife in her boot. Not a perfect safety measure, but better preparation than we ever saw from Aaron. As she leaves the bathroom, Joseph jumps out at her again in another attempt to scare her, which is, again, unsuccessful. We're beginning to see a desperation in Joseph, an honest desire to truly scare Sara, and it hasn't worked quite yet, which again seems to intrigue and surprise him. There's a brief mention of a patchy spot on his beard, which he just explains away as how his beard grows, but remember that plot point. Jump scare part 2 still doesn't work. On the drive out to a random spot in the wilderness, we suddenly realize that Joseph is wearing the Peach Fuzz mask again. This is a continuation of his efforts to scare Sara, this time not with a jump scare, but an unsettling, lingering choice that illustrates his predatory nature, or perhaps his willingness to commit to strangeness. It's hard to say exactly what he wants out of it, other than control, which Sara still refuses to give to him. She just thinks it's cute. When he doesn't get the response he wants, he resorts to describing more graphic scenarios, clearly just trying to make her uncomfortable. The scene cuts before we can tell if it works. On the walk to the spot Joseph is picked out, we start to see how frustrated he's becoming by his lack of control over the situation. Sara asks him questions about his childhood, which he gives vague, one-word answers to until finally snapping and telling Sara to save her questions for when they get there, a fake smile plastered on his face. He really does run just like a child, and react like one too, I should mention. Yet another element outside of his control has ruined Joseph's shot. The river he intended to shoot at, which was deep and rushing when he scouted it, is now nothing more than a shallow stream. Apparently, he wanted to be submerged in some kind of Jesus metaphor, which, okay. But now that it's different than he imagined, he has a full temper tantrum, which Sara only manages to calm down by referencing the Coppola story he described earlier. It works. I think one thing that should be acknowledged here, whether intentional on Joseph's part or not, is the confidence that Sara gains throughout this film, especially in moments like these. Every time that she successfully avoids being scared, reacts neutrally to one of Joseph's big swings, and especially manages to calm Joseph himself down, it reinforces in her head that she is in control of the situation, not Joseph. Keep in mind that to Sara, Joseph isn't a killer. He's just an imaginative or potentially delusional eccentric with a fixation on murder and filmmaking. So, by default, she's seeing the situation as less dangerous than it actually is, and with every successful defusal or defense, she lets her guard down more and more. Again, we don't know if this is Joseph's intention, but it certainly works to his benefit. They continue with the scene in the shallow water, and Joseph has to do multiple takes of the same line due to Sara's interruptions, airplanes, ponytail fixes, bird noises, and lighting issues. He's really struggling. And after a certain point, he has a full meltdown. He walks off into the woods and promptly lays down face first. Sara puts out a hand to comfort him, and he holds her like a child would a mother. The shoot is over. Joseph gives up. The tone has definitively shifted by this point. Joseph is hiding out, not talking to Sara, and listening to the same song over and over on repeat. Interestingly, it feels like at this point in the movie, Joseph has no interest in pursuing any kind of murder plot. He really would prefer to be left alone. However, Sara, so desperate for her quality footage, remarking on his vulnerability, has taken to pushing him. Joseph doesn't like being on the receiving end of his own treatment, and now that's all he's getting. Do you blame Sara for doing what she's doing? Do you think of her character any worse for exploiting someone's fragile mental state, even knowing who it is she's exploiting? I think it's a hard moment to examine, because we in some ways want to see Joseph punished for the terrible things he's done, but on the other hand, Sara doesn't know, at least completely, about the majority of his crimes, and from her point of view is simply pushing further with someone who has made it clear that they no longer have an interest in pursuing this relationship. We can understand her motivation and her desperation, but by telling us that she knows he's vulnerable, she's also telling us she knows that she's taking advantage of that vulnerability. It's an interesting thought experiment. Joseph says, verbatim, that he wants Sara to leave, and that he doesn't want her to make her documentary anymore, but she keeps pushing back as he sits sulking in a jacuzzi that, ironically, has a "children must have adult supervision" sign. She turns off his song, which definitely distracts him as he launches into a monologue about why he loves the song so much. For all we know, the whole story could be a lie, but here's what he says. When he was 15, he looked old enough to get into bars to see live music. An obscure band came to town and played a song called "Sara Loves Her Juicy Fruit," the very same song that Joseph has been playing on repeat. Joseph went and partied with the band after the show until they inevitably had to move on. He walked home and was approached by a man in a van who offered to give him a ride. The man said something very familiar. Oh my god, this is gonna be a good day. A line that, if you've been paying attention, you'll remember is the first thing Joseph said to Aaron in the first film. This line obviously doesn't bode well for Joseph in his story. The man took Joseph deep into the woods, where he brutally beat him, gave him a shovel, and forced him to dig his own grave. Joseph remembers thinking that he should have felt bad about the man who was about to bury him alive, but instead, he was magnetized to him, said he loved him, how smart he was, how commanding. Joseph's energy is back as he tells the story. He's smiling coyly. It's partially why I don't believe the story to be true. As he talks about the man, it seems like he's describing himself, how smart he is, how powerful. He sees himself as a genius predator, one who deserves respect for what he does. The man didn't tie Joseph up well enough, and he escaped. He overpowered the man, choking him to death, and realized in that moment that killing was, in his own words, his destiny. He stripped the man, threw him into the hole, then stripped himself and laid with the man, communing. This part of the story is interesting. It reminds us of how intimate and spiritual Joseph considers his work, and if this story is true, it's potentially the origin point of his obsession. Was Joseph traumatized and permanently affected by his own assault, or was he always this dark of a beast and only realized it once the first opportunity presented itself? I don't think we'll ever know. The nudity element of the story is also interesting. interesting, and may potentially have to do with Joseph's usage of nudity as a tool in his manipulations. Not only is it effective for gaining control, but it's further tied to the potential backstory that led him down this path. Remember earlier when Sara asked Joseph about his beard? Well, he admits that he had lied to her, though he doesn't admit to the full scale. Joseph's beard doesn't grow that way. He actually pulls the hairs out impulsively, due to a rare disorder known as trichotillomania. He didn't used to have this mental health condition, but tells Sara that the man who beat him did, and that after he killed him, he somehow inherited this condition from him, as he has, allegedly, taken parts from all his victims. His spirit consumed it from theirs. Whether or not this story is true, Joseph's insanity is on full display here, and also a deep sadness that he cannot access these powerful personal moments anymore, even somewhat implying that he intends to take his own life. And yet somehow, Sara still doesn't seem to be concerned. She joins him in the water, once again holding him like a child, telling him to close his eyes, rubbing him, shushing him, and comforting him in an incredibly intimate scene. Sara leaves to take a shower, and we linger on Joseph's face as he ponders this encounter. The scene switches to a different shot where now Joseph addresses Sara through the camera directly, thanking her for her actions and saying she's made him feel feelings that he never thought he'd feel again. A pretty big red flag, if you ask me, considering most of his positive feelings have a lot to do with murder. The bigger red flag comes when the camera's focus shifts to a knife on the floor. Joseph goes to sneak up on Sara in the shower, and in a very tense scene, we assume that the switch has now been flipped and that Joseph now has reverted to his bloodthirsty ways. It's possible that Joseph's actual intention here is just to try to scare Sara again, but either way, when he pulls open the shower curtain, Sara isn't there, and instead leaps out from behind him, her face strangely taped, screaming at him in quite the same way he did during his scare attempts. Joseph screams, not aggressively, but out of genuine surprise and fear, and as Sara stands over him, asking how he feels, he begins to growl enthusiastically. No peach fuzz mask, but an animal just the same, and he screams at Sara, and Sara screams back. They are truly matching each other's freak here. And after this moment, a very strange new dynamic has been reached. They're playing hide and seek with knives, hanging out and chatting and laughing and having a good time like two little kids at a sleepover. And it's like they're actually friends now. Sara asks leading questions about Joseph's violence, about if he wants to kill her, and he says he does, but he prefers sharing his work with her more than simply ending her. She also asks if he feels bad about the people he's killed, and he says that he does sometimes, but also feels that he gives them fair warning about what they're walking into, bringing us back to the idea of the open door at the beginning of the film, as well as Joseph's whole honest admission of being a killer, and even the axe buried in the stump at the beginning of the first film. I don't think of Joseph as a remorseful character. However, it's interesting to hear this perspective from him. He speaks about it so casually, but it's such a huge indicator to both how seriously and non-seriously he takes his work all at once. He says it's almost like they want to die, which, ironically, is a similar sentiment that we tend to share when discussing Creep and other movies like it. Why are characters making the choices they're making? Why aren't they running? Why does Aaron approach Joseph with information in the way he does? Does he want to die? That's the way we phrase it when we see the failing self-preservation skills. It's almost like they want to die. But of course, they don't. They just don't realize they're playing for their life until it's too late. The game is heavily weighted in Joseph's favor because he's the only one who knows what the stakes are. He's the one in control. It's so funny how this film manages to capture not just discussions and ideas surrounding films and creativity, but discussions and ideas around its own narrative and others like it. There's a really great moment where Sara asks if Joseph is going to kill her after 24 hours, referencing the exact wording of the safety assurance he gave her earlier, and he looks at her with this "you caught me" face, asking her why she'd bring that up, but he seems genuinely impressed that Sara manages to keep up with his manipulations. I think he's also laughing at the fact that this is the most honest he's ever been about his life, and Sarah's still here. It tickles him. At this point, I think we can start to pick up on an attraction from Joseph towards Sara. He films her simply while she's just doing the dishes, comparing her to a deer just being a deer in the woods, which obviously sounds a bit more threatening considering his wolf Sona. But also, around this point, Joseph admits that he knows, 1, that Sara is trying to manipulate him to get the footage she wants, which obviously indicates that 2, he knows about encounters. He even knows about the knife in Sara's boot. He's not mad about this. Instead, it really seems like he sees the two of them as kindred spirits by this point. He earnestly doesn't think Sara or him have been lying, just playing with facts. But then Joseph asks perhaps the most important question of the night. Does Sara believe that he's a serial killer? She says says no. He asks why not. She says the stories he's been telling are ridiculous, and honestly criticizes his actions and motivations in the same way a film reviewer would a character's. And it's because, in her eyes, he's been playing a character all night, which I'd say is true, just not in the way she thinks. Joseph tells Sara that he's not worried about her taking all the evidence she's been compiling tonight to the police because tomorrow morning he'll be dead. He wants Sara to kill him on film. Screw another basic murder, screw this documentary idea. This is what he's most excited about now. It's really interesting. I think that there are plenty of people who might watch these movies, Creep 2 specifically, and think that Joseph is some kind of mastermind, perfectly in control of the situation, and that every element of his behavior is perfectly calculated. While that's a fun theory to run with, and there are genuine arguments to be made to defend it, I think that honestly what this film and parts of the first film have done is show how Joseph is an incredibly disorganized but lucky killer, how emotions control him, how susceptible he is to his impulses, and most of all, how he's making things up as he goes. Does this temper tantrum throwing, smoothie making, jump scare enthusiast really seem like someone with a foolproof plan? No, he's just a good improviser. That's why this new excitement is 1, so believable, and 2, so dangerous. Because while he fully believes in it, by now we know that it'll just take one thing going wrong for him to completely change his mind. And if that happens, who knows what he'll do to Sara. Sara's not super on board with this idea, and for a second, it seems like she almost considers leaving, but by now Joseph's energy is too high, and for the first time, Sara maybe feels out of control. Joseph gives Sara his axe, lays down on the table wearing the peach fuzz mask, and asks her to cut his head off. Just like that, things are moving pretty fast. He's manic. I'm really curious about this scene. Is this more manipulation? Is Joseph really that gung-ho to die like this, or is he that confident that Sara won't be able to do it? Sara certainly doesn't seem thrilled. Maybe he's picked up on that, but isn't it still an insane risk to take? Again, he could genuinely be on board with this, but I just don't know. She clearly doesn't do it because the scene cuts to a new shot where it appears that Joseph has tied a noose around his neck and now intends to make Sara kill him by making her complicit. If she doesn't save him, she's technically killing him. This also doesn't work out as Sara does try to save him, but also the rope breaks. Frantically running around already with a new idea, Joseph encounters Sara getting ready to go. It's become too much for her. Joseph begs her not to leave and she asks what's wrong with him, and Sara, not to be that guy, but he hasn't exactly been indicating the stablest of minds, but it doesn't matter. Joseph reveals that he was wearing a harness underneath his shirt, and when he jumped from the banister, he was never in any actual danger. And then the manipulation comes back in full swing. Joseph says he really likes Sara, which is probably true, and that he's just trying to connect with her. But then he says all the fucked up shit he's been doing was for the sake of her show, so she could have the best episode of Encounters ever. He says he's not actually a murderer and acts like it was so obvious, like Sara was right not to have believed him. He essentially uses the same pleading argument he used on Aaron in that final tape to lure him out to the lake to get Sara to stay and continue to spend time with him, insulting himself and appealing to the empathetic, loneliness-seeking side of Sara that she acknowledged at the very beginning of the film. He compliments her, makes her feel good and justified, and apologizes, and it works, because somehow it always works. They share a laugh together as Sara accepts the compliment, and they talk about how good the scene will look in her show, and I don't know if Sara's smarter than Aaron. I don't think it matters how smart you are when it comes to a person like Joseph, who's willing to say anything, do anything, be anything, so you'll come back and give him just one more chance. He's fully back in control now, and he loves it. The spark is back. To illustrate just how in control Joseph is, in the next scene, they're playing two lies and a truth, and it's gotten to the point that, for some reason, Sara has faith that Joseph will take this game seriously and not just use it as another way to manipulate her. Maybe he tells the truth, maybe he doesn't, but Joseph admits that he's never slept with a woman, which somehow ends in him kissing Sara. It's honestly a great scene because if Joseph is telling the truth, then it's a great insight into what his life was like when he was younger, which was, in a word, dysfunctional. And if he isn't, then it just backs up our understanding of this truly deranged, evil character and his willingness to just say whatever gets him what he wants. But they kiss, and then things get really bad really fast. Joseph leads a far too trusting Sara out into the woods. He's lit only by the light from Sara's camera, making him this ominous, pale figure, and he presents Sara with a locket, the one he made for Aaron. In fact, Aaron's picture is still in it, which Joseph apologizes for, stating that Sara was a surprise, and then he shows Sara an open grave. He dug it before she even came up, and he says he didn't know if it was going to be for her or for him, but that he's figured it out now. He turns the camera onto Sara, and the look on her face isn't really one we've seen before. It's the look of someone who's realized they've just made a huge mistake. Joseph has her knife. He asks if she's ready for the grand finale of the episode. She timidly replies, okay, and then he stabs himself. We don't see it, but we hear it. See Sara react to it. He does it multiple times as Sara watches silently in horror. He wants Sara to stab herself. Then they'll crawl into the open grave and die together, like Romeo and Juliet, he says. He hands her the knife, waiting for her to do to herself what he just did, and she runs. I asked this in the last video, but at what point in this sequence of events would you have left? When he said he was a killer? When he took his dick out? When he crashed out by the lake? When he tried to get you to cut his head off? These movies are so good because they really ask you, to put yourself in the protagonist's state of mind and consider what you'd be willing to put up with to get what you want. But there's also this undeniable element of removal as an audience member. So even though I can sit here and analyze this movie for 18 pages and talk about it for an hour, I don't know when I would have left. I'm a socially anxious dude. I'm not like Sara, so probably earlier than she did. But then again, what if I wanted what she wanted as badly as she did? Hell, I'm a video creator. What if I thought this was the way to go from being a rising creator to an established figure in the community? What if I thought I'd be capturing something no one else had? Would I risk my safety for it? Would you? It's easy to blame protagonists in these kinds of movies, to do what Joseph does and exclaim, they wanted to die, they were too stupid, too unobservant, too self-centered. But that's not fair. Not when you're being stalked, manipulated, and by now hunted by someone who honestly wants to hurt you. Maybe Sara should have packed a gun. Maybe Aaron shouldn't have gone back to the lake, but they didn't know they were in a horror movie. They didn't know a lot of things, not for sure. And that's what someone like Joseph counts on. He counts on your faith in humanity, in your willingness to believe in someone, even if they've given you every reason not to. He counts on your unwillingness to believe that someone could be so evil, so dangerous, so good at lying. But there are people like Joseph walking around right now. Maybe they aren't killers, maybe they aren't even violent, but they're there, doing whatever they can to get whatever they want. And right now, all Joseph wants is Sara dead. He's losing a lot of blood. He's definitely hurt. It makes sense that he can't keep up with her, but as he yells out into the woods, they're in the middle of nowhere. She has nowhere to go, so all she can do is hide, wait to take her moment, and she does, but she fails. Somehow, off camera, Joseph manages to get the knife back from her, and as she runs away, she falls, and Joseph takes his opportunity, stabbing her multiple times as she cries out weakly into the night before falling silent. Joseph drags her body to the hole in the ground, drops her in, and approaches the camera. He says he doesn't think he's gonna die. He must have missed a vital organ. He speaks directly to Sara now, telling her she did it. She made a great episode. He calls her his muse. I believe that he believes what he's saying, but what he's saying doesn't matter. He made a mistake. He didn't double tap. It's not at all the point of this essay, but as a horror fan, I feel obligated to tell you, always double tap, because Sara's still alive. And as he goes on and on about his art and his intentions and his desire to kill, she drags herself out of her grave, quietly picks up a shovel, and smashes it over his head. She made it! She actually made it! Well, the movie ends with a shot of a crowded street, and after a moment of adjusting to seeing this many characters in a creep movie, we realize that Sara is there in the crowd, walking casually, and that obviously someone is filming her. The person behind the camera follows her down the street and boards a train with her. As she looks ahead at nothing in particular, the person behind the camera whistles a familiar tune. For a moment, just a moment, Sara makes eye contact with the person holding the camera. A brief, terrifying instant of shock flashes across her face, and the camera goes off. Always double tap. Thanks for watching.